Imagine waking up in a world where nearly 40% of the global population lives in countries deemed not free, the highest level of oppression since 1997. Authoritarianism is re-emerging and reshaping our political landscape. Nations that once championed democratic governance are reverting to more restrictive practices. In North Africa, many countries are witnessing a concentration of power that limits parliamentary influence and civil liberties. Similarly, in parts of Latin America, leaders are undermining vital checks and balances that uphold democratic systems. Moreover, the rise of far-right movements in Europe poses another challenge to democratic values, as these groups often advocate for nationalism and reject liberal principles. Today, we will explore the trends influencing global governance, including the 17 consecutive years of decline in global freedom rankings reported by Freedom House. Additionally, military coups have surged in regions like Myanmar and Sudan, highlighting the fragility of democratic systems worldwide. Hit that like button, subscribe, and let's uncover whether democracies can adapt in this changing landscape, or if we are witnessing a pivotal shift in governance. In its 50th anniversary report, Freedom House reveals a concerning trend. For 17 consecutive years, global freedom rankings have been in decline. Currently, a staggering 38% of the world's population lives in countries classified as not free. These levels of freedom are alarmingly similar to those from 1973, underscoring a troubling regression in democratic principles. Recent events highlight this downward trajectory. In Burkina Faso and Guinea, military coups have disrupted governance, showcasing a revival of authoritarian tactics that were thought to be fading. In Tunisia, President Kais Saied has expanded his executive powers, sidelining the parliament and eroding democratic norms. Similarly, in El Salvador, President Nayib Bukele has eliminated term limits, compromising essential checks on his authority. These examples illustrate a growing trend of authoritarian governance that threatens the foundations of democracy worldwide. As we reflect on these statistics and events, it becomes clear that the struggle for freedom is far from over. Guys, before we continue, share your thoughts in the comments. Are we on the brink of a global shift away from freedom, or can democracy find a way to bounce back? Authoritarian regimes are increasingly eroding democratic norms around the world, using both internal and external pressures to consolidate their power. Internally, leaders often take steps to strengthen their grip on authority, undermining the checks and balances that are vital for a healthy democracy. For instance, we see leaders dismissing or sidelining parliaments and judicial systems, effectively silencing opposition and reducing accountability. Externally, the rise of powerful authoritarian models, particularly from Russia and China, is influencing other nations. These countries promote their governance styles as alternatives to liberal democracy, encouraging leaders in other regions to adopt similar tactics. This trend is especially evident in parts of Africa and Latin America, where some governments are increasingly aligning with these authoritarian ideas. Democratic backsliding can be observed in various regions. In Tunisia, for example, the recent concentration of power by the president has raised alarms about the future of democracy. In El Salvador, changes to the law have allowed the president to extend his rule, limiting democratic competition. Similarly, in Hungary, policies enacted by the government has restricted media freedom and weakened judicial independence, illustrating a troubling shift away from democratic norms. These examples highlight a broader pattern where the foundations of democracy are under threat. As authoritarian influences grow stronger, it becomes crucial for citizens and democratic institutions to resist these pressures and defend their rights. Despite the rise of authoritarianism, powerful signs of resilience within democratic values are emerging worldwide. In Iran and China, anti-government protests have surged, with citizens demanding greater freedoms. In Iran, recent demonstrations against oppressive policies showcase the unwavering spirit of the people, while protests in China against strict COVID-19 measures reflected a growing desire for accountability from the government. Successful elections in countries like Colombia and Lesotho serve as a beacon of hope for democracy. In In Colombia, voters recently chose leaders committed to social equity and human rights, demonstrating a strong democratic process. Lesotho's peaceful transfer of power and high electoral participation highlight that democracy can thrive when citizens actively engage. A compelling example of resilience is Ukraine's defense against Russian aggression. The determination of the Ukrainian people to uphold their sovereignty and democratic values has galvanized international support, underscoring the importance of standing up against authoritarianism. Ukraine's struggle symbolizes hope for democracies everywhere, reminding us that the fight for freedom is ongoing. Civil society organizations also demonstrate remarkable resilience by advocating for human rights and holding governments accountable. Their efforts emphasize that even in challenging times, the foundation of democracy can endure and flourish. As we reflect on these signs of resilience, it's clear that while authoritarianism poses significant challenges, the spirit of democracy remains alive, fueled by the courage and determination of people everywhere. To understand the rise of authoritarianism, we need to explore authoritarian governmentality. This concept looks at how some governments create binding obligations and authoritative orders that dictate how people should behave. In these systems, the government prioritizes compliance over individual freedom. Authority in authoritarian regimes often comes from powerful leaders, traditions, or specific beliefs. These governments emphasize the need to follow rules and maintain order, leading people to believe that these obligations are necessary for everyone's safety. As a result, individuals may see the state as the main authority that decides what is acceptable behavior. Coercive measures are common in these systems. For instance, during the COVID-19 pandemic, many governments imposed strict lockdowns and mandated vaccinations, presenting these actions as necessary for public health. While the goal was to protect citizens, these measures also allowed governments to strengthen their control and limit personal freedoms. This trend is concerning. In times of crisis, authoritarian governments can quickly take charge and restrict rights, making obedience more important than democratic values. Understanding this concept helps us recognize how these systems operate and why the struggle for democracy remains vital. To understand today's political landscape, we must look at the history of democracy. The third wave of democracy began in the late 20th century, when many countries, especially in Latin America, Asia and Eastern Europe, shifted from authoritarian rule to democratic governance. At its peak in 2007, nearly 46% of the countries were classified as free. However, since then, we've seen troubling declines, with democratic backsliding in places like Turkey and Hungary. Recent trends show a mix of hope and concern. While we see signs of democratic resilience in protests and successful elections, authoritarian regimes are also tightening their grip. Countries like Belarus and Myanmar highlight this ongoing struggle. This situation suggests we could either witness a resurgence of democracy or a further entrenchment of authoritarian rule. Understanding the cyclical nature of governance is crucial. Democracy and authoritarianism can rise and fall in waves, depending on citizens' engagement. To protect our freedoms, we must remain vigilant and actively participate in democratic process. Supporting democratic institutions and advocating for rights is essential to ensure that hard-won freedoms are not lost. So, we are witnessing a significant rise in authoritarianism, with nearly 40% of the global population living in countries deemed not free. Despite these challenges, there are inspiring signs of resilience in democracy, from protests in Iran to successful elections in countries like Colombia. These moments demonstrate that the fight for democratic values is far from over. However, to protect and promote democracy, global collaboration is essential. Democracies must unite to support one another, share best practices, and resist authoritarian influences. As we navigate this uncertain landscape, the question remains: will the 21st century be a renaissance of authoritarianism, or can democracy claim its right place in the world? Share your personal opinion below. Guys, I truly believe that the future depends on our collective efforts to champion freedom, uphold rights, and ensure that voices of the people are heard. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe and share this video so you don't miss our next episodes. See you very soon!